Hi, everybody. So I didn't talk for 10 minutes, so that's good. Better than the first one. Still figuring this live stream stuff out. There we go. Thanks, David. And hi, Ala. And hi, Jen. And hi, folks. Welcome. So yeah, now that I'm actually being heard. So yeah, welcome to session 2 of the 2018 Patreon live stream. So the way this has been evolving is basically I'm doing these live streams to help raise awareness of what I'm doing on Patreon, to hopefully get more support and patrons, or just getting the word out about what I've been working on, which is a lot of different things. And you could check the link out on the video description here to see everything I've been doing with Patreon and everything I've been doing with being an editor, writer, teacher, online learning, all of those great things. So if you can spare a few dollars every month, that would be amazing. And you give me more time and more focus for what I really want to be doing and bringing into this world, which is consciousness related media, content, etc. Hi, Jim. Hi, everybody. Jim's on our PKD class on Neura. So yeah, everybody. So let me get my class notes up here, my lecture notes, as it were. A couple of cool things going on this week. Oh, and as I was mentioning, the way that this is evolving, I'm still going to do these live streams once or twice, maybe, could be even weekly. There's so many things happening to talk about that we could do this as sort of a weekly thing. But what I'd like to start doing is growing this into something that the patrons can really get more value out of, which is specifically having conversations with authors, writers, scholars, etc., that are at first private and shared for the patrons, and then we can publish it later, so you'll get early access to conversations. So I'm working on the first round of people I want to talk with, and if you register for my Patreon, that would be awesome. You'll get early access to all of that as well. So here we go with my notes. Okay. So yeah, so that's my Patreon spiel. Do check it out. So yeah, a lot has happened over the past 2 weeks or so since we've done this. And particularly maybe the first thing I really wanted to tackle is just to make a note about Gebser as a post-war thinker. Now, Gebser is a big part of my, Gebser and Aurobindo and Teilhard de Chardin are very much integral to my worldview. But I'm interested in kind of addressing, and I want to say modernizing too much, but bringing these integral thinkers and visionaries into a contemporary conversation. So looking at contemporary art and manifestations of the integral in contemporary art, how is consciousness transforming and evolving? I think a great example is probably William Irwin Thompson and what he was working on and has been working on for, since the 70s onward, but especially in the 80s and 90s, and how he was looking at art and culture and kind of bringing these things together in a very syncretic way, transdisciplinary way. So that's what I'm hoping to continue doing. And I don't think it's necessarily anything new, but myself living in the present, being a younger person who perhaps is a little bit more, embedded in the cultural conversations and in the art and in the media, to continue the dialogue, to continue this integral question and inquiry. So yeah, so this is this topic, Gebser and post-war thinking. The reason why I bring it up, because Gebser wrote Ever-Present Origin in 1949, right? So he wrote this book as a response to World War I and World War II, living through fascism and living through an extremely turbulent period during European history, and really beginning to kind of understand that there was a breakdown of consciousness happening. There was a breakdown in world happening there. And so, Ever-Present Origin, if you were to take Gebser and look at him from a historical academic point of view, you might try to frame him as a post-war thinker, somebody with a response, a spiritual response, but with a response to the kind of catastrophe of history, as Walter Benjamin would describe with Paul Klee. So how do you respond to that? And so Gebser that's how I kind of see him, and that's how I've sort of been describing him to more people as I'm sort of digging in recently. But post-war thought is often associated, as we've been hearing so much, this conversation about the problems of postmodernism, et cetera, et cetera. And rather than situating, oh, Carmen, hey, Carmen, nice to see you. Are you using ConvertKit for this? No, I'm actually using Zoom. I haven't tried ConvertKit, but this is Zoom. I take up Zoom and then you click broadcast to Facebook or live stream to Facebook. And you can also live stream to YouTube with it. I like the format. Having trouble with reaching people on a page, but on my profile account, it seems to be still pretty good. Still a lot of high engagement, as you can see, a whole bunch of people here. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, so Gebser is a post-war thinker. And so there's this, there's all of this discussion right now with Jordan Peterson and post-war thinking and postmodernism and cultural Marxism and all this stuff. And I've recently kind of gotten embedded in a long thread on my wall about all of this. And not to really dive too deeply into this, but as like the single point, the single takeaway that I think is good and makes Gebser an interesting thinker in this regard is, first of all, Gebser is not, he may be a generalist because he was writing in the 40s and the 50s, but he's very much a critic of the sort of grand narrative thinking that led to the catastrophes of the 20th century, right? So he, in many ways, he kind of foreshadowed postmodern thinking, but he also, if we're going to summarize postmodernity as a kind of a deconstructive breakdown of thought and meta-narratives and so on, the A-Perspectivity in Gebser's writing foreshadows this by decades. And he was looking at this in terms of language and poetry in Rilke, right? So he was looking at the relationship between the words, the grammatical shifts and transformations happening in language, and how it was more about these interstices, these interrelationships, these networks, as it were, in thinking, rather than the objects of thinking themselves, discrete objects. So yeah, he was more interested in this kind of really forward-thinking thing. And that's why, and just in most of his writing, he kind of comes across as a critic of modernity and postmodernity and kind of leaves an opening. He's neither, I mean, if we're going to say left or right, he's neither truly left or right, but he's really trying to think and relate to the world and relate to thought and the structures of thought in a new way. And so, I've kind of resisted the tendency to lump him in as a developmentalist or, somebody who sums up all knowledge and things like that. That kind of summative quantitative impulse is not what Gebser was doing. And he leaves a true challenge, for those who have the right mind for it, and are up for the challenge to respond not only to modernity, but also postmodernity in some other way. So in many ways, looking at him like this, he is kind of a thinker for the future, for a kind of way of thinking that we don't really have yet, but we have some inklings of right now. We have some references to right now. So that's what I'm very interested in building out, a kind of integral thinking that is not about modern and postmodern, but not romantic and not kind of tossing and attacking postmodernity as this evil thing. It's all part of this sort of breakdown. So we need to be looking forward anyway. And I think that's all I really want to say about that without getting too heavily involved in a Peterson debate, as I already am involved. But yeah, so I would not say that Gebser is a traditionalist in the least, and he was extremely, gosh, I mean, he really breaks down, the modernist and even and foreshadows the postmodernist problem of ratio, the increasing fragmentation and infighting and increasingly granular disciplinarities. And so on. So, but again, integrality is about the relationship of the whole, not the whole as a singular grand narrative, but it's more than that. And we have to think more than that in order to really kind of explore this integral impulse in pedagogy and academia. And so I would just say that, well, there's not too much material about this direction explicitly associated with integral. I think Jorge Ferrer is doing interesting things with revisioning transpersonal theory in his latest book, which I can't recall at the moment, which is an update of it 17 years later. and Debashish Banerjee, because his Seven Quartets is talking about this as well. And I've been chatting with Brand Stickley a little bit about this as a kind of a direction, a kind of a Deleuzian movement forward. And I think Deleuze, I mean, if you put him on the left, whatever, I mean, it's a kind of thinking that I think anyway is closer to Gebser and A-Perspectivity, Deleuze and the rhizome, than not. And so this is where I'm interested in leaning into and pushing into, to begin to really think about transformations of culture in a nonlinear way, in an A-Perspectival way, and not necessarily in a dialectical or developmental one. So that's what my first book's looking at. That's what I'm hoping to contribute it with the anthology book that I'm working on now with a few different writers and friends. So I'm looking for this kind of way forward to think about consciousness evolution and consciousness transformation that is finally trying to kind of see through, okay, we've been doing this already. We've been romantic about this. We've been conservative about this. Let's get on with it. Let's do something interesting and new. So that's it. That's the first point. I'm not going to go into any more unless anybody's got questions about that. Special announcement, though, and this part's fun. Let me see if I can stop sharing and then share my page on Safari. Here we go. Okay, so special announcement, everybody. I am pleased to announce that my paper, my abstract, was accepted to the Allies of Evolution, the Integral European Conference, in May, of May 22nd to May 27th in Hungary. I have never been to Europe before. I have never really left this hemisphere, so this is a big deal for me. The last time I was involved in a integral conference, I was there and I had the honor of being there as a blogger at ITC, the Integral Theory Conference on the West Coast in California, in Sonoma, and then before that in San Francisco. But I was there as a blogger. I was there as a writer, a kind of an anthropologist, sort of exploring what everyone was doing. This time I'm going as a presenter, and I'm very happy and honored to be doing that. So yeah, just really excited about that. But the reason why I bring it up is basically to, if you are interested in assisting, it's a bit of an expensive package just to register and to get there, and the flight and so on. So I might be doing a Indiegogo looking to fundraise this. But I also really want to leave open, this is also and primarily what Patreon is for as well. So if you'd be willing, I would really appreciate any donations and patronage to help me get here. And I'll be doing something more explicitly for this soon too on Indiegogo. I think I'm definitely gonna do that to give you a focus. But yeah, so what am I doing there? Well, let me see if I can. Okay, I don't have that open right now, but I can tell you offhand what I'm doing at the Integral European Conference is talking about everything I just said about taking integral studies forward from a more Gebserian perspective. The topic of the conference is called Allies of Evolution, and a lot of it is integral theory based. Maybe not integral theory centric, or maybe it is. I don't know. Integral theory centric, integral theory based. Definitely out of that kind of impulse of integral, but they're a big tent. And I think what they're doing is similar to what Meta Integral was doing on the West Coast, which is opening it up for everybody. So, a general kind of evolution of consciousness perspective. And they're basically asking, what's your vision here? And I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to engage with integral thinkers and practitioners, and bring some of Gebser into the conversation, because very often he's kind of seen as a stepping stone for this sort of meta integral or integral grand practice or praxis and map and theory. And so, integral theorists tend to use archaic, magic, mythic, mental, integral, and they got that from Gebser. But my point isn't so much to say we need to be reading Gebser a whole lot more, although we can certainly do that. But it is to say that the methodology in which Gebser is using, that is looking at art, looking at the phenomenology of experience and being a transdisciplinary scholar, is really important, and not necessarily taking a developmental perspective, but this kind of meta-modern, postmodern, whatever you want to call it, that kind of label, to break through and offer something else. And I think it could be very useful and helpful for people who are engaged in all these various things, like, well, I mean, there's a lot of business practitioners there. There's a lot of organizational leadership development there and so on. But I think to really kind of bring something forward and kind of say, where is the process of planetization doesn't necessarily fit into the way we've been doing things, or even our sense of what development and emergence means. And Gebser is just a good example to kind of break that open and offer an alternative. So that's why I'm going to kind of bring in Gebserian nonlinear Deleuzian perspective on what integral studies could be. So I'm definitely part of the theory work, although there will be some practical applications. And the presentation will be, I've been having a few good trials here, more locally in St. Petersburg. I did a talk for the Theosophical Society and then also for the Meta Center right here in St. Pete. And I was basically introducing Gebser. I was using some multimedia. I was using some images and musical accompaniment to kind of get people to engage with what the feel, the phenomenology of these structures in terms of the experience, the ontological experience of being in a world, being in a worldview, the Umwelt, right? So I think that's really important. And even though this is a theory-based thing, the theory is deeply phenomenological and experiential. I mean, you have to really kind of live and see the structures alive in you. And that is my cat, as always. She loves to chime in right in the middle of the talk. But yeah, so this is what I'm doing. There's many great speakers there. I have a lot to learn from their perspectives, of course, as well. So I'm just very, very excited to kind of be engaging with this sort of larger integral umbrella. And I'll be going in May, and I'm going to try to do a fundraiser. So if you're joining me now, that's why, one of the reasons why I wanted to make this talk today, to kind of just introduce the fundraiser and to get your support from it. So one way to support me is through Patreon, and another way will be most likely through Indiegogo, which I'm still setting up the text for that right now. Yes, Jen is saying the floof. So yeah, Alla, yeah, I got your message. Sorry I haven't responded quite yet. I haven't studied Gebser yet, so I'm interested in how his A-Perspectivity is different from, say, dialectical monism. That's interesting. So I think you'd have to explain to me dialectical monism. Just simply, I don't have that offhand. But in a nutshell, A-Perspectivity is similar to what Deleuze was talking about with the rhizome or the assemblage, in my opinion. And also, if you want another correlative, the A-Perspectival is about the relationship between objects and the kind of dynamism and energy between particular and discrete things, seeing things more as fields, relations, becomings, energies. So there's a movement in A-Perspectivity. And so one of the examples Gebser uses in Ever-Present Origin, since he was writing in the 40s and he was doing this, a lot of his studies between the 30s and the 40s, is the works of Picasso and the way that there's a kind of time play and a multidimensionality in that expression of art. So I think time play and multidimensionality is another example of what A-Perspectivity could mean. And when it comes to thought structures and thinking and philosophy, it's a whole thing, but he described as a shift from philosophy as this kind of stasis of thought, working with logic, paradox, and basically the philosophical tradition into ideology, which he describes as a kind of a living thinking, a kind of a gnosis with thought. But in terms of its structure and its dimensionality, I would probably say that the A-Perspectival kind of does away with dialectical thought. It moves away from that as a form or a structure in which to kind of make sense of the world. Again, so yeah, for example, mythic time is circular, modern time is linear. A-Perspectival, out of time. Yes, with a footnote that the A-Perspectival would be more of time freedom, which doesn't necessarily mean that you escape time. The A-Perspectival as a multidimensional image has the mythical and the mental and the archaic and the magical, all as kind of facets of the sort of larger hyperdimensional, as you will, if you will, A-Perspectivity. So it's a kind of it's a difficult thing to describe in that it's almost shape shifting. And it seems to be part of something that's not entirely able to be pinned down by thought or categorization. And so when you interact with A-Perspectivity or see A-Perspectivity, perceive, I think you use the term perceive it, there's a kind of participation with it that doesn't negate necessarily dialectical thought and so on, but it isn't any one of those things. It's kind of slipping between. And so that's one of the interesting questions when you're looking today at what A-Perspectivity could mean. There's of course great work with the integral theorists in terms of what they're doing with meta theory and developmental psychology. That's not my field and not my specialization, so I can't really speak to that. But they do kind of use this in their developmental mappings in terms of the kinds of cognitive thought structures that emerge later on. But for me, I'm more interested in finding it out in the wild, in looking at the cultural narratives and the performances of art and looking for that A-Perspectivity as it's generating and being generative in culture. And I think when you do that, I mentioned this in the last live stream, I think, but if you do that, you really kind of, you find a way to relate to people who aren't necessarily reading Gebser or integral studies or the evolution of consciousness. You find a way to engage with them because they're already doing something. And you're taking that thing they're doing and you're opening it up further for them, and that's what's exciting about kind of taking this Gebser-esque methodology, which is go run around in art and science and philosophy and look at all the different fields and look for the way that thought and thinking is changing. And since Gebser wrote 40, 50, 60 years ago, a lot has changed, right? Do I offer tutoring service? I mean, sure. I think one way to do that would be Patreon if you'd be interested. That's one of the things I've offered on Patreon is, don't mind my cat, she just needs a pet. What I've offered on Patreon is for folks who donate at a certain level, we can do one-on-one talks on Skype or on Zoom or on the phone for about an hour, 90 minutes. I actually just had one last month for about 2 hours because we just had such a great conversation. So that might be one way to work this in and make this valuable exchange for you if you're interested. So yeah, and for everybody else listening too, that would be a great way to engage if you want to engage about this stuff one-on-one. Patreon's the way to do it. So yeah, let's move into the next thing. But yeah, just happy to share that with everybody and really excited. And yeah, and I don't know, I'm kind of surprised. I wasn't expecting, because the response came a little late for the IEC in Budapest, and I just wasn't sure if I was going to get in or there's too many submissions. And I know they received over 200 and they picked about 120. So I'm very honored to be, one of those individuals. And I'm happy because, again, this is coming in at a right angle from what I see the field is doing. And if it's anything like the West Coast's integral consciousness culture, which I love, and they're an ally, you know, I may be critical of singling out developmental theory as a way to of really using these ideas. You know, I'm happy that they're willing to have a dialogue and an engagement. So my talk will be, as I said, introducing the structures, and then looking at the present and looking at the ways in which integrality is manifesting in the present. And then also, you know, just briefly, and this is going to be a future book in itself, and it's going to be a little bit more theoretical, but basically I'm interested in really kind of developing this whole thing, right? A kind of a post-developmental, non-linear way of looking at the evolution of consciousness, and kind of drawing in the best thinkers and the best writers on that, and kind of creating a template for people who really want to engage with that in their own way, and just sort of, you know, it's a theoretical work. It's a kind of answer to Gebser and the present and Thompson and so on. So I'm working on that long term. That's not going to be passages. Passages is going to be more of a kind of riffing on present media and art in search of these things, and implicating this new way of thinking about integrality and mutation as a sort of discontinuous leap. So that could be one thing I could also mention here. And I've been reading 1,000 Years of Nonlinear History by Manuel de Landa, a Mexican postmodern thinker, philosopher. He does classes on architecture and Deleuze and assemblages and social theory. But what I like about it, I mean, you know, here's an interesting, and this kind of goes back to what we're talking about before in terms of the challenges of being spiritually oriented, having a kind of mystical practice or spiritual perspective on life, and being an academic or being a scholar in the world. It's very easy to kind of recoil against postmodern thinking and contemporary academia for being so deconstructive, and for being, you know, not being able to make any kind of larger statements or statements that are not situated in a kind of historical embeddedness, right? So if, again, you know, if you've got the right mind for it, I don't think these things are necessarily antithetical to spirituality, as I've been mentioning with Debashish, or an activist, yeah, Alice saying. And to the degree that the consciousness culture as a kind of umbrella statement can take on, you know, critical theory and postmodernism and engage and work through some of these problems and insights and metabolize them, use a biological metaphor, the more powerful and the more empowered we can be, so as not to slip into romantic movements and kind of a retroactive kind of flight back into, you know, into the problems, the problems that grand narratives and grand narrative thinking had and have. There's ways through, and that's always been my feeling. There are ways through, but the way out is through. And they may not necessarily, you know, I mean, if you try to say these things in academia, no matter what, you know, there might not be much of a response. But I just think for the integrity of the consciousness culture, wanting to create a robust intellectual network of thinkers, this is really important. We can't kind of just slip into regressive thinking. So that's sort of like my little spiel about that, just the importance of working on this stuff and working with it. But I think it can be, and I, you know, again, I would point to seven quartets by Debashish. I would point to 1,000 Years of Nonlinear History. But 1,000 Years is not, it's a materialist book. But in the same way that, let's say, Thompson was working in Lindisfarne with scientists, himself being an esotericist and a mythopoetic thinker, there's nothing stopping you from engaging with the materials in a mythopoetic way, or as Richard Doyle would describe, a kind of ultra metacognitive way. And funny enough, Thompson used that word too, metacognition, as a kind of poesis. So if you engage mythopoetically with the sciences and the postmodern thinking, et cetera, interesting things do come up. We just have to start doing that more and publishing it and writing about it. And I'm thinking of Thompson's work specifically during the 80s, I think Imaginary Landscape, where he's hanging out with Lynn Margulis and Francisco Varela and Humberto Maturana and talking about the evolution of the cell in biology, and then making connections with Rudolf Steiner and the evolution of consciousness, and then making connections with Rapunzel fairy tale and the biology of a plant. And he kind of and astrology too, and astronomy, because of the movement of the Rapunzel flower is the movement of Mercury. So he kind of just does this beautiful connective interrelationship between all of these different things, and brings you to another level where you're kind of bringing in myth and science, et cetera, et cetera. Why not treat postmodernity and any secular academia as merely another expression, material expression of the sciences? And why not respond to it poetically, as we always have, as a counterculture? And that's if there is anything, it's not the divisiveness of counterculture, it's the charged in visionary engagement with the world as it is, mutating it, right? So that's like really that's really my point with all of this, to really kind of engage with the thinking in a mythopoetic level, and interesting things do emerge. So hey, Mario, how do you think such a network would be possible when there is so much to study, so much to learn, and everyone is working at something different at the same time, or at the same at different times, ideas? Yeah, so like, I think we have to build it, and in many ways that's sort of what Revelore is, and what I'm doing and what I'm working on right now is a kind of general kind of, I guess you could say, I'm the curator of philosophies at the press, and as an imprint, basically, what I want to do is just sort of create a platform where we can publish and reference each other and help to build that culture, to build that network. So I think community building is really important. So if you want to create that kind of, counterculture, you have to build it through publishing and writing, right? That's the biggest thing. That's the most important thing. So that's how you build it. But yeah, there is so much to learn. You can't do it alone. You have to, as this is again a very quote unquote postmodern way of thinking, but you have to, as it were, engage in a kind of combinatorial creativity, a kind of hive mind, but not a singular hive mind, but a kind of living ecosystem of people and ideas. The more you can create those kind of biomes, or Jen's art, so you liked what I was saying, area X's, right? The more you can create these kind of ecosystems of people and artists and ideas and thinkers, the more you create a space where people can start to eat that fruit and to grow there and to produce their own materials, whether it's theory or art. And I think, art itself has just as much of an impact, if not more, than some of the theoretical work. Although that, of course, that's always a loop, right? You read a theorist and you get an idea. Like the Southern Reach trilogy, I know Vandermeer is reading Semio Text and The Coming Insurrection. I don't know how he connected that. I really would love to pick his brain about that, but the theory and the art kind of just mutate together and tumble together. That's that. I mean, I think that's like, on the ground, what you do, right? And then you compare and you relate and you share and you cross-reference each other and you read each other. And that's the only way to really build the culture. And not as a separate culture, but as, that's something, even as a whole, this alleged counterculture is always in dialogue with the sort of mother culture, the larger community that it's a part of, responding to it, looking at works of art, right? Diagnosing, being like a physician and putting your pulse on what is the kind of narrative and media and myth that we're spinning, and what does that say about where we are, and so on. So, I think as a whole too, we don't want to become insular and just sort of create our own little biome. The biome is meant to be, the ecology is meant to interface and network with the whole, right? That integrative impulse, that planetization impulse is the whole. So that's where you orient it to. to whatever little way we can do, so yeah, and then making that as accessible as possible. So like, whatever, I could be reading 1,000 Years Nonlinear History in Deleuze and going on this new tract with Integral. And, unless I'm going to publish that and share that and have conversations, then that's not going to be very helpful, right? So I think, publishing and sharing and putting your media out there and creating collaborative conversational spaces, again, the community is really important. And having more than one person doing it. And as I'm going into it, I'm already thinking like, okay, who are the people I want to speak to and relate to about this? Can I promote their work in my work because it was so necessary for it? I don't know, how can I share and help their platforms as well, right? So I don't think this is easy though. It's like, I can have like an impassioned plea to bring together our combinatorial creativity and build culture, but it's there is so much to learn. Everyone's working on different things and so on. So there's no easy answer. I don't know. We just have to try, right? So yeah, thanks for that. A great question though. Really good question to continually ask. I think anybody who's involved in the consciousness culture, because we're already at we're already an extension, we're already a kind of appendage to, these larger ideas that are happening and that are already going on in the New York Times and media. Just like, how do we interface with all of this and what's relevant? Joseph's asking, did you ever study with Babbage? No, I didn't, at Fordham. So, okay, Fordham, great. Alma mater. No, I don't think I have, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that professor and what they're teaching, what they're offering, what they're specializing in. Be very interested. So yeah, I went to Fordham in undergrad. That was my undergrad degree, and I got sociology. Funny enough, because I thought at the time, and I don't really regret it, but sociology at the time I thought would be a good way to engage in these questions. And actually, my undergrad sociology professor introduced me to Delanda's work. Coming all the way back around to that, it's a very materialist viewpoint, right, of history. And he's actually kind of referencing these scientists who are trying to, and, at the first glance, you might even recoil from it, right? Because this is not mythopoetic, but in a way it is, in its own way, a kind of material of history to observe history in a nonlinear way as flows and energies, and to comparatively, by analogy, but of course he's saying this isn't just analogy, it's perhaps more an accurate description of the process taking place, using kind of complex systems and geological sciences to understand the transformation from one type of society into another type of society. So in the same way that, elements and properties that when heated up phase change into something else, water to gas, perhaps the heating up of civilization, nomadic societies did that phase change, that chaotic bifurcation into settlements. And now we're at the point where everything's heating up again and something else is going on in terms of planetization. So that's me putting some things in there, but that's what he's looking at, 1,000 years of kind of materialist energy flows, and looking at cities as kind of exfoliations, like a seashell or like a mollusk of a kind of fortressing and buttressing of these energy flows. And I think it's a very kind of useful way to be thinking about consciousness transformation and cultural evolution. So that's how I'm linking that all together. I mean, I don't know what his personal alliances are with mysticism or anything, but I just found it a very interesting way to bring in a contemporary Deleuzian thinker, and also to kind of bring in what Thompson was doing, where Thompson was also using systems theory, complexity theory, and his work with Ralph Abraham, and looking at how the shifting from different cultural ecologies, as he described them, was this process of bifurcation, which it's much messier. It doesn't really fit. I mean, you can put it on a map, you can put it as a list, and it's very convenient, and you probably should. But in terms of actually, recognizing the movement and the complexity of it, it's more than that as well. So it's much more situated to a Gebserian approach, which is about discontinuous leaps and mutations, than a developmentalist approach. So yeah, I'm just rambling about that now though. So yeah, then the only other thing, I don't know, we could talk about more things, and you could definitely bring up your questions. I'm gonna open up, I think I lost the video box. I can open that up right now. Okay, yeah, so I am listening to the chat box, guys. So if you want to type in a question, please do. A couple other things going on right now, of course, is neural learning. And right now we're towards the end of a 7-week, we've got, tomorrow is the fifth week, and then there's 6th and 7th week, of reading Philip K. Dick every single week, a book a week. And Richard Doyle is heading up that class, and I'm just facilitating it. And Richard Doyle was actually on Third Eye Drops podcast, so I'm going to link to that too in the session notes. Definitely recommend it. Talking about the noosphere and metacognition and all sorts of fun stuff. But yeah, so we're reading Philip K. Dick, and we're doing this every week, and we're kind of really deep diving into the metaphysics and the sort of consciousness intensification that can take place if you really read Philip K. Dick, and really take up some of the questions that he was working with and wrestling with. So it's been a hell of a lot of fun. We've actually had Tessa Dick on, one of Philip K. Dick's widow. So she's been wonderful in the chat box. We'd love to have her on live stream, but it's up to her. But she's been wonderful providing a biographical context to a lot of what Philip K. Dick was writing. Like, for instance, kind of a weird little synchronicity or intuition is a better way to put it. I was reading Scanner Darkly about halfway through it. And I just got the sense that Tessa had some part to play in the creative process behind this book. And sure enough, in our forum, she was saying that, she actually helped him write the characters and develop the plot. So I was just kind of blown away by that weird intuition, just like really kind of immersing myself in the language. Eric Davis talks a lot about this too, when he worked on the exegesis of Philip K. Dick, the immersion into the language and the writing of Philip K. Dick, just thousands and thousands of words and pages as he's wrestling with the kind of metaphysics of his religious experience back and forth, and looking over his entire, what would you call it? His all of his published works, looking over all of his novels and essays, and thinking and relating his experience to them as if his authorship, his artistry, in some way was anticipating his experience, his religious experience on 2374. So it's been quite a submersion into text. The world as text is certainly a kind of a concrete feeling in reading Philip K. Dick so much, so intensely. So if you want to join us, we're live streaming to Facebook tomorrow night at 7:30, as we always do, and we're going to be talking about A Scanner Darkly, which is a favorite of many people. I've never read it before, I'm embarrassed to say, but I'm very happy to be reading it now with all of this in the right context. It's been very interesting. Love the film too. But yeah, so let me just grab some questions. Oh yeah, of course. Thanks for stopping in. I'll respond to your message too in private. So Joseph's saying Babbage is a professor of philosophy, executive director of the Nietzsche Society, though I don't hear her reference Deleuze or Integral as much. Oh, okay, interesting. I was on the Lincoln Center campus, so it's possible I didn't have as much exposure to the main campus. Maybe that's where Babbage is. There's another great guy there. I can't remember his name right now. He's a media theorist, and he's writing about the internet and McLuhan. He's also there as well, good Fordham professor. The Fordham lecture of McLuhan is fun too, if you ever want to YouTube that and listen to an interesting discussion on art and media. William's asking, I liked your mention of the phrase phase transitions in society. Starting over 30 years ago, I've been discussing phase transitions in physics, chemistry, biology, and consciousness in my lectures on science and spirituality in Boston. New York and Washington, D.C. William, that's great. Love to connect more and see what you're up to. Yeah, so Delando was using a physicist who I can't recall at the moment to talk about it as well. He was referencing a physicist in his writings about these phase shiftings. And then I would also recommend Ralph Abraham's Bolts from the Blue. It's more of a kind of a textbook overview of the mathematical mentalities, but he's bringing in the phase transitions, chaos theory, and then using that sort of terminology of a chaotic bifurcation as a sort of phase shift into a new cultural mentality. Thompson uses the word cultural mentality. And yeah, I mean, guys, if you are interested in that and a kind of performance of all of these things from like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would check out William Irwin Thompson's Coming into Being. Yeah, I'd probably recommend that one the most since it has kind of everything in it. And also Self and Society, which is one of his later works that kind of brings it all together too. But Thompson's great because he hangs out with all these scientists who are thinking like this. Then he applies it to cultural evolution. And he doesn't, to the degree that there is some sort of emergence or development, he tries to mitigate a developmental or linear view as much as possible, in a very similar way that Gebser does. Gebser's actually more cautious about that than Thompson, I would say, in that he doesn't, Gebser is living between the world wars and just not having it. Very cautious about all of that kind of thinking. And Thompson is sobering in a very good way in the sense that part of what he works into his theory of cultural evolution is that there are these dark ages that punctuate these transformations, right? These phase shifts, these chaotic bifurcations where a complex system collapses and then organizes around another kind of center of gravity. And that is very important, that dip, right? And so like Gebser was writing about the 20th century as if it was that dip, that kind of implosion. And I think he did think it was, but he also was worried that unless we really kind of found that new center of gravity or began to orient towards that wholeness and integrality or Teilhard's planetization, then we would go through a more extensive kind of dark age. And Aurobindo talked about that too, how these kinds of evolutionary transformations could fail locally or even on a planetary scale. And that this sort of impulse of evolution to, in an Aurobindian sense, incarnate the logos and the supramental would start over somewhere else, that the cosmos is a sort of draw towards that. I guess it's a little teleological, but let's not completely toss that out, right? Let's kind of wrestle with that question. Because ultimately that's sort of like, as a mystical experience, as a kind of religious experience, like what Philip K. Dick encountered, what even contemporary postmodern mystics like an artist like Grant Morrison encountered, is this kind of sense that, the earth is this sort of cosmic being birthed, right? Or something is emerging out of this. There's a kind of integrality emerging out of this, bringing the wholeness together. So that's not something I'm willing to just abandon for, complete, I think nonlinearity works with that somehow. And it's already helping sophisticate our way of understanding cultural evolution. So if we kind of lean in that further, we can explore these other questions that I think are not easy to answer and shouldn't be, or else we're just probably sliding backwards into something, an older thought that we've already kind of rehashed. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining it. Let's see, what time is it? We've been going for about an hour. We can go a little longer. Anybody has questions? I've really been kind of ranting this time, but would be happy to take your questions, completely unrelated to any of the things that I've been saying to you. And while I'm waiting, I guess I will just simply mention the unfortunate passing of Daniel Quinn, which was like the last note on my session notes. And Yeah, if you haven't read Daniel Quinn, I would really recommend reading Ishmael. Um, I read him in high school. He published in the 90s this book that he spent like 12 years working on, a fiction book. And it's a very Socratic book. Um, and I mean, I guess I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but it involves a very strange conversation between a person and a non-human sentient being. And this, it primarily is a dialogue and a series of philosophical conversations in a kind of Socratic method, as a kind of, let's sit and philosophize chapter to chapter on different topics about civilization. And I really feel that Daniel Quinn, in many ways, expressed and embodied a lot of the things that we talk about in terms of cultural evolution and transformation. And he also did this, these days, Charles Eisenstein and the New Story and the New Story Hub are exploring this idea of, okay, so let's use a big picture mythopoetic way of thinking, right? Myths. What is the old myth? What is the old myth of civilization, and how do we enter the new myth? And where Daniel Quinn didn't really talk about necessarily a new myth, although he did kind of tease at it, he kind of painted this really profound picture of civilization, and he described them as leavers and takers, and this kind of movement out of hunter-gatherer nomadic societies into civilization, and as these kind of two dominant modes of thinking. And he really kind of narrativized and mythologized them in a way that I think as a teenager and even as an adult is still very refreshing and powerful. And it can really kind of dislodge you if you hadn't really started thinking about these things before. It's just been a book that was viral before the internet was a virality, right? In the 90s. And just to give you an example of what I mean, I read the book in high school, and then I brought it in to share with my philosophy professor in my first year of undergrad. And my philosophy professor really enjoyed it. And a few days later, he came to me and he's like, I love the book. There's a lot to talk about. But before I give it back to you, can I give it over to one of my colleagues in the philosophy department? So I said, yeah. And it took the whole semester and 3 or 4 other professors before it finally came back to me. And this is not really a unique story. This is just the kind of book that is passed around so much. So, if you're interested in New Story and the New Story Hub and the kind of, the big myths that orient us, right? That's a really good book to enjoy and share with your kids, and share with people who may not be thinking along these lines. Joseph's sharing the interview with Daniel Quinn from the film What a Way to Go, Life at the End of Empire. Yeah, and Quinn wrote Beyond Civilization, which is one of his books, nonfiction books, where he, very short, and just kind of looking at how do we do things in a way that is not what civilization is, which is the kind of, industrial nation state, or before that, a kingdom, a kind of, agrarian-based civilization. How do we become more like our ancestors, but turning on the spiral of cultural evolution, so to speak, and doing something new? Because we can't go back. There are too many of us. We can't reverse time and become hunter-gatherers again in the face of the Anthropocene. Although some say that might be forced on us, but he's looking for ways forward, and I think it's really important. Joseph's like, Quinn and Thompson are the Irish saving civilization once again. Yeah. So Thompson's also thinking about this too, and how to think beyond civilization. And I think he's probably even used that phrase in some of his works in the 70s, which were more, in some ways more experimental, because they were like Darkness and Scattered Light, for instance, 4 essays on the future. It was looking at ways in which you can imagine a non-cyberpunk future in terms of mega cities and mega industrialization and so on. How do we decentralize, and how do we create a kind of anarchic post-civilization, or kind of decentralized nonlinear post-civilization? Now, I'm throwing those words around a lot, but I think if we would be more specific here, I would say networks and decentralization as this kind of impulse of the future, whereby for Thompson, he described it as a kind of shrink or return to the village, decentralization of the cities and move to the village. I don't know if this is actually going to happen or not, but in the book, he's describing this. This shrinking back to what he called a meta-industrial village, which was super high-tech, completely kind of suffused with the natural environment, kind of like think of permaculture and all those kind of biological technologies and sciences, but also being hyper-connected and linked up to the world. This is before the internet. He was writing this. So in many ways, I think that's like kind of a beautiful vision, a kind of beautiful utopian vision to bounce back on and think about as we move into the future. I don't know if that's really the way it will go, but I do think decentralization is important. And some of the technologies, the disruptive technologies like cryptocurrency, for instance, which I am by no means an expert of, are alluding to this. This is the Umwelt, right? This is the kind of the meaning behind the word, between the words. This kind of decentralized, networked, post-civilizational, noetic polity of human beings beginning to mirror the complex systems of organic life and ecosystems, so that nature and culture, in a positive sense, are no longer really distinguishable. And, perhaps just to wrap it up, like one of the things that Thompson also mentions, and we're also talking about before with Gebser and Aurobindo, is this idea that, dark ages often precipitate some greater transformation, a real integration. But the dark age is important, and Thompson describes it as evil enunciates the next world order, which kind of sounds, world order, I know is a loaded term on the internet, conspiracy theorists, but it didn't mean it like that. But to the extent that evil enunciates the next world order and chaos is sort of like the initiatory aspect of this transformation, in the negative, we're already experiencing ourselves fused with nature. Bruno Latour talks about this with his book on Gaia and his lectures online on YouTube. You can find this idea that we are no longer distinguishable due to climate change and the Anthropocene, and between nature and culture. Civilization and its impact on the environment has now become, in a strange loop, a force of nature. So we have become a force of nature against our own selves, with the rising tides and climate change and environmental catastrophe and so on. So we've kind of created this crisis, but the meaning behind the crisis is that the boundaries between nature and civilization are gone in the negative as a crisis. It's up to us to begin thinking in ways that can start to converge constructively and positively that diffusion, that complete identification with natural environments. And a lot of people are already talking about this. They've been talking about this for decades. It's just becoming more acutely important right now, right? We either figure it out or we don't right now. So, I know Buckminster Fuller and a lot of these sort of these futurist architects are thinking about this. They were thinking about this decades and decades ago. But I think, the more we're learning about ecosystems and networks and the way plants kind of have this sort of intelligence and communication, the more we're learning about mycelial networks, the more we're learning about how ecosystems function, the more these things actually relate to the kind of postmodern thinking, right? The sort of Deleuzian rhizome and the assemblage and combinatorial creativity and decentralized cryptocurrency. So the more our thinking itself is beginning to mirror natural systems. And I think, to the degree that at the very least, the way we talk about cultural evolution, to the degree that can begin to speak to, these natural ways of thinking involving mysticism and mythopoesis, the better. And I think that's where we're at right now. He's mentioning wit. Evan Thompson involved with neuro. I would love to develop. That'd be beautiful to have a course with Evan. I have his book. I haven't read his latest book on what is it called? Gosh, I have it over here somewhere. but yeah, his latest book on Buddhism and cognitive science, right? And cognitive philosophy of mind. I need to read that, but I would love to have him on at least to talk about his work. And if he wants to do that, a class would be great. Bill Thompson as well. I know he's not as active in the lecturing circuit anymore. He's more of retired, I think. He's expressed. Waking Being, Dreaming Being. Yeah, thanks, Joseph. But I would love to have both of the Thompsons on, at least for conversations if they're free. Because I think, they really, as underread as Bill Thompson is, and the Lindisfarne Association, like they're a great example of what to continue doing. And to the degree that like going back and reading them and promoting this great historical moment with all of those scientists and poets and esotericists hanging out together, there's a degree that we can show that as a kind of performance of planetary culture in the present. I think, we can do that, continue to do that, and sort of find more nuances for it today. So that, if that's what I'm doing, just summing it up, right? That's what I'm trying to work on with everybody, and with the imprint on Revelor and my book and my books. So, yeah, so I don't know if I should keep going here, but I really appreciate your questions, Joseph and William and Ala and Mario, and Jen, thanks for being here, and Jim too. And yeah, if you would like to send me, yeah, that is what you're doing, yeah, Bren. If you want to join my Patreon, you can give anything from like $1 to 50 right now, kind of scaling it, building it. And that would help me immensely because, as you know, in this kind of gig economy, it's kind of patchwork. Neura is doing well, but it's still a baby. It can't necessarily provide the fruit of a sustainable monthly income quite yet, and it's making its way there. And I hope that it will, in its own time. So, I'm relying on different gigs and writing and everything. So, but as you know, when you're spread a little thin with your gig economy, it can be a little difficult to focus entirely on writing. Doing the best I can, and I think I'm doing it pretty well. But yeah, your support means more time and more attention, more energy to these conversations, to building the community, building the culture, and doing my writing about all this. So really would appreciate that. It's awesome things are coming, and there are some perks with Patreon. Patreon folks you can opt in to get coupons for Neura classes, and you can also opt in to get one-on-ones with me, and you also get all like early writing like down, so if I'm working on a piece, an essay, you'll get that first. And you can offer feedback and so on. And once the book Passages has enough material to share, is presentable, you'll get a sneak peek at that. You'll get a sneak peek of the anthologies and the Revelor imprint projects from the Curator of Philosophies that I'll be working on, because your feedback would actually be awesome, because you're the kind of people I want to get feedback from about these ideas, and actually your participation too. I see I've got some great friends in here. Brant, Daniel Ryan, Jen's Art, Joseph, love your feedback, love your notes and your participation, even if that means, a lot of you means, submitting something and doing some writing with Revelor, which would be awesome. Jen, obviously, but Brant as well, we should talk. And Daniel too. But we're doing, so I should go in a little note about Revelor Neura crossover, because we're doing something called Neurologicals, and those are basically zine style educational pamphlets that are physical copies. You can hold it in your hand and it'll accompany a class. And the way we're doing it right now, it could be a small little booklet that's like syllabus and writing exercises and so on, or it could be kind of like a longer essay. It's really up to the professor and teacher and what they want to do with it. There could be art in it. So I'm really kind of looking to create, and Jen and I have great conversations about this, to really kind of create that electricity and culture, and to kind of get that, zines are back, the printed word is back, which is wonderful. And So to really kind of tap into that as a way to generate this culture is awesome. And to have it be something educational is even more awesome. Little booklets with pointing out instructions, meditation instructions, artwork, etc. Working on one right now with Richard Doyle in terms of the PKD class. And what he's doing, he's bringing in, we're talking with an artist who might be able to illustrate some of it, or at least have some of his. Yeah, zines are back, like cyberpunk is finally back. Hell yeah. Yeah, so that's the kind of underground, that's the rhizome, and that's where the life, the fertility of the soil, right? The kind of generative properties of soil is like where you want to have that to build your culture. So you kind of need that as its foundation. You need the roots, you need the dirt. So the rhizome and the zine, right? But yeah, so we're working on one on Philip K. Dick. And that's really fun because we're doing 7 books, as I mentioned. It's a really involved process. So having a kind of, you know, the books themselves have conversations with you, right? It's this idea that books are alive, and to have a zine that is working with that process as you're going through Philip K. Dick's writings, that's bringing in related materials on the noosphere and the exegesis and so on as you're going through the class. It's just awesome. Just super, yeah. Classes are definitely super fun. Anybody who's joining now, hey Martin, we're doing a class on Monday night with Richard Doyle on Philip K. Dick, and we're reading A Scanner Darkly. So that's tomorrow. I'm like halfway through the book, and I'll definitely finish that by tomorrow. And then Jen and I are working on a class 2, which we are rushing to get ready and announce, but it's probably going to happen around the same time as this Annihilation movie comes out. And we want to do a kind of writerly philosophical workshop. And basically there's going to be reading involved. We're going to be reading the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. We're going to be talking about the film, and we're going to be looking at language. We'll be looking at metaphysics and philosophy, kind of looking at some of the things I mentioned. What I'll be contributing is this, the component of Area X. If you're not familiar with it, you might call it weird ecology or eco-horror, but there's this kind of really powerful way Vandermeer uses language to dissolve the boundary between yourself and the natural environment or the world. And it's this kind of slippage you start to encounter as you read it, because you can really get under your skin and into your mind. You start to almost kind of feel that reality is a little weirder than it actually, very similar to Philip K. Dick in a different tone. And I've been throwing this word around. Reality is psychoactive, and literature is psychoactive. So it kind of changes your perception, your perceptual senses for encountering and experiencing reality. So look at the language and study it. So we're going to be doing that. We'll be looking at some of the philosophical backgrounds behind the Southern Reach trilogy in terms of what Vandermeer was reading, then also kind of the philosophy of weird lit and eco-horror with Tim Morton and hyperobjects and things like that. And then we'll be doing writing exercises as we are ourselves exploring Area X and becoming Area X. And it's going to be a lot of fun. And go see the movie and go read the book if you hadn't, or wait to read it with us, because we'll be doing that in the coming weeks too. So I think that's it. I think that's it for today. We've gone a little over an hour and 15 minutes. And I think I said everything I needed to say. The announcement for my fundraiser should be going up relatively shortly. I'll have a video and a live stream for it and everything else. So if that's how you want to, if you can, I would deeply appreciate it. If that's how you want to help, you can wait on that, or you can plug in right now with Patreon and assist there as well. But yeah, so that's up to you. Right now, the only option is Patreon, and I'd appreciate your support. And in the next week or so, I'll put up the Indiegogo. I think Indiegogo is probably still the best one for my trip to Budapest, to Hungary, and for the Integral European Conference, where I'll be presenting on Gebser and Deleuze and new media and all sorts of fun stuff. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your participation and tuning in with me today. And I will try to do this more often. And, this is twice this month. Maybe we'll do another one at the beginning of March, and tune in with everybody, see where everybody's at, and talk about more stuff. So yeah, thanks everybody. Really appreciate your participation, and see you next time. Have a great day. Have a great weekend.